There are certain behaviors, reactions, and survival patterns that reveal when a woman has been used too many times. You can see it in how she gives, how she protects herself, and how she disconnects. Today, we're breaking down the psychological signs that shape the identity of a woman who has been taken advantage of repeatedly, so you can understand her, not judge her. Hyperindependence is one of the most misunderstood psychological outcomes in women who have been repeatedly used or taken advantage of. From the outside, it appears as confidence, strength, and the ability to handle everything alone. But psychologically, it's a self-defense mechanism that gets built layer by layer after trust has been consistently broken. It is not born from empowerment, it is born from necessity. A woman who has been used learns early that depending on others often leads to disappointment, manipulation, or emotional harm. So she slowly unlearns the idea that support is safe and replaces it with the belief that self-reliance is the only reliable strategy. This kind of hyper-independence doesn't emerge suddenly. It develops through experiences where she gave too much, trusted too deeply, or invested too sincerely, only to realize that the people she trusted were benefiting from her effort without giving anything meaningful back. Over time, her brain begins associating closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with danger. The emotional cost of being let down repeatedly becomes so high that she teaches herself to stop expecting anything from anyone. Psychologically, her nervous system begins operating in a protective mode. She avoids asking for help because past experiences taught her that asking usually ends in rejection or being taken for granted. She avoids relying on others because the people she relied on either used her generosity or misinterpreted her kindness as weakness. She avoids leaning emotionally on someone because she knows how it feels when someone withdraws the moment she needs support. Hyper-independence becomes a shield that keeps her functioning but also keeps her disconnected. In relationships, this trait can be confusing for the people around her. She seems like she doesn't need affection, reassurance, or emotional closeness, when in reality, she needs those things deeply but has conditioned herself not to depend on them. She manages her emotional struggles privately. She solves crises alone. She carries her stress without expressing it. And when she is overwhelmed, instead of reaching out, she isolates. This isolation is not because she wants distance, but because she believes involving someone else will either burden them or expose her to more disappointment. Hyperindependence also shows up in the way she handles practical responsibilities. She becomes the person who pays her own bills, fixes her own problems, and organizes her life with precision. She may refuse support even when she desperately needs it. She is capable, but her capability was built from environments where no one stepped in for her. She learned to survive by becoming everything she needed but couldn't find. People may admire her strength, but they rarely understand the emotional history behind it. Another dimension of this identity is the hidden exhaustion. Being hyper-independent looks powerful, but it is mentally draining. She doesn't rest emotionally. She rarely allows herself to break down. She pushes through stress because she doesn't trust anyone to handle things for her. She acts strong not because she is always strong, but because she has no memory of what it feels like to be supported consistently. This exhaustion becomes a silent part of her life, something she experiences but never expresses openly. At the psychological core, hyper-independence is simply a response to repeated emotional injuries. When she was used, she learned that giving too much resulted in pain. When she trusted, she learned that people could take advantage of that trust. When she relied on someone, she learned that reliability was temporary. These lessons accumulate and shape her into a woman who builds emotional walls, handles everything herself, and avoids vulnerability as a means of survival. This is why hyper-independence becomes such a defining identity trait in women who have been used repeatedly. Emotional guardedness is one of the clearest psychological patterns seen in women who have been used repeatedly. It doesn't appear suddenly, and it doesn't come from a natural lack of affection. Instead, it develops slowly through experiences where openness led to betrayal, vulnerability led to manipulation, and trust resulted in disappointment. Over time, she begins to associate emotional exposure with danger. Her mind learns that being expressive, honest, or available creates opportunities for others to exploit her, so she adapts by shutting certain doors inside herself, allowing only limited access to the parts of her that once flowed freely. This guardedness often starts subtly. At first, she doesn't stop sharing completely. She simply becomes more selective. She pays attention to who listens, who remembers, and who uses her words later in ways that hurt her. The more these patterns repeat, the more she withdraws emotionally. She no longer offers her thoughts easily, even when she feels deeply. She becomes careful with her words because she can't afford another experience where her vulnerability becomes ammunition against her. Her emotional boundaries become firmer, not out of coldness, but out of a protective instinct shaped by past wounds. In conversation, she may appear calm, collected, even emotionally distant, but internally she is analyzing everything. She listens far more than she speaks. She measures people by their actions, not their promises. She notices inconsistencies, hidden intentions, and behaviors that others might ignore. Her guardedness makes her an observer rather than a participant, especially in emotional situations. She learned to do this because being expressive in the past made her a target for people who wanted to take advantage of her. Now she trusts her silence more than she trusts her openness. Relationships become especially challenging for her. She might crave connection, but she fears the vulnerability that comes with it. She hesitates to let someone in because she knows how hard it is to repair herself once someone misuses her trust. She may appear uninterested, but the truth is that she protects her emotions with a seriousness that others don't understand. She avoids deep conversations about her feelings, not because she lacks them, but because sharing them has historically been painful. She fears dependence, intimacy, and emotional intimacy, not because she doesn't want them, but because they require a level of exposure that feels unsafe. Her guardedness also affects how she interprets affection or attention. When someone shows interest, she questions it. When someone compliments her, she wonders if there's an intention behind it. When someone promises consistency, she waits to see the first sign of inconsistency. She doesn't assume sincerity, she waits for proof. This mindset isn't negativity, it's protection. It's a coping pattern built from experiences where she misjudged intentions and paid a painful price for trusting too quickly. Even when she begins to trust someone, she does so cautiously. She might share pieces of her past but keep the deepest parts hidden. She may express emotions indirectly rather than clearly. She may choose to open up slowly, one layer at a time. And even then, she stays prepared to retreat. Emotional guardedness means she never fully lets go of the protective distance she keeps. She can care deeply, but she rarely shows the full intensity of that care, fearing that doing so will give someone power over her. Another aspect of this identity is her internal struggle. She often wants to be open but feels blocked by her own fear. She wants to express love but hesitates, remembering how she was taken for granted. She wants emotional clarity, but avoids the vulnerability required to seek it. This creates an inner conflict where her emotions move in one direction and her protective instincts pull her in another. It's not that she doesn't feel, she feels deeply. She just refuses to feel openly in front of someone who could misuse that openness. Emotional guardedness becomes her shield, her filter, and her safety barrier. It helps her function in a world where she was once hurt for being too trusting, too vulnerable, and too emotionally available. Overgiving is one of the most deeply rooted behavioral patterns in a woman who has been used repeatedly. It begins subtly, long before she even realizes it has become a part of her identity. At first, she gives because she genuinely cares. She gives because kindness is natural to her, because nurturing is her instinct, and because she believes relationships are built on mutual effort. But while her giving comes from sincerity, the people she encounters often take it as an invitation to take more. Over time, she becomes conditioned to believe that her value lies in what she provides, not in who she is. When a woman is used for her kindness, effort, loyalty, or emotional support, she starts equating love with labor. She believes that to be chosen, she must give more. To be kept, she must sacrifice more. To be appreciated, she must prove herself through actions rather than simply existing as she is. This mindset becomes deeply ingrained to the point where giving excessively feels normal to her. She doesn't question why she's always the one adjusting, compromising, and holding everything together. She simply assumes that this is her role, her responsibility, her way of maintaining connection. The problem is that this overgiving is rarely balanced. She often finds herself in relationships where she gives emotionally, mentally, financially, or physically and receives very little in return. But instead of recognizing the imbalance, she blames herself. She thinks maybe she didn't give enough, care enough, understand enough. She interprets the lack of reciprocation as a sign that she needs to try harder. She becomes so used to carrying the emotional weight that she doesn't even realize when someone else should be contributing. Giving becomes her default setting, even when it drains her. Psychologically, this pattern forms from a place of fear, fear of being abandoned, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. She gives excessively as a way to secure the connection, as if her worth depends on how much she can offer. Past experiences where she was discarded or taken for granted reinforce this belief. Every time someone used her and walked away, she internalized a message. Maybe if I had done more, they would have stayed. This thought becomes an invisible force, driving her to overextend herself again and again. In relationships, her overgiving often attracts the wrong kind of people, those who excel at taking. Takers sense when someone is willing to overinvest, and they use that generosity to their advantage. She becomes the emotional caretaker, the problem solver, the giver of second chances, the one who forgives too quickly and sacrifices too easily. People start expecting her to show up even when they don't. They rely on her strength while offering none of their own. And because she is used to giving without receiving, she rarely recognizes her own exhaustion until it is too late. Another layer of this identity is that she struggles to receive compliments, help, affection, support. These things make her uncomfortable because she's not used to being on the receiving end. When someone tries to do something for her, she often feels guilty, undeserving, or awkward. She is so accustomed to being the giver that she doesn't know how to be cared for. She minimizes her needs, dismisses her feelings, and convinces herself that she doesn't require anything in return. This makes the imbalance even more pronounced, reinforcing the cycle of overgiving. Internally, overgiving leaves her drained. She may not show it, but she feels emotionally emptied. She pours so much of herself into others that she forgets to pour into herself. She stretches her limits without acknowledging her exhaustion. She suppresses her needs because she believes expressing them might push others away. And even though she gives out of love, loyalty, or fear of loss, the constant output without input slowly chips away at her emotional stability, leaving her carrying burdens that were never meant to be hers. Ignoring red flags is one of the most painful yet common behaviors in a woman who has been used repeatedly. This pattern doesn't come from a lack of intelligence or awareness. In fact, she often sees the signs clearly. What she struggles with is acting on them. Her history with relationships has shaped a mindset where she fears loss more than she fears disappointment. She fears starting over more than she fears being mistreated. And she fears being alone more than she fears enduring imbalance. These fears make her tolerate behaviors that she knows somewhere deep inside are not good for her. The instinct to overlook red flags usually begins with her desire to believe in potential. She doesn't get attached to what a person is showing in the moment. She gets attached to who she believes they could become. She clings to the idea of their better version, the version she hopes will emerge if she is patient enough or loving enough. This hope leads her to reinterpret or minimize concerning behaviors. If someone is inconsistent, she calls it stress. If someone is dishonest, she calls it misunderstanding. If someone is emotionally unavailable, she calls it trauma. She tries to justify what hurts because facing the truth feels heavier than believing a comforting explanation. A woman who has been used often learns to normalize emotional discomfort. She has tolerated so much imbalance in the past that red flags start feeling familiar rather than alarming. Her mind becomes conditioned to prioritize keeping the relationship intact over protecting her emotional well-being. She tells herself to stay calm, be understanding, or be patient, even when her instincts are warning her. And because she wants peace, she convinces herself that the problems will eventually settle if she keeps giving more. Another reason she ignores red flags is her fear of confrontation. Confrontation can lead to conflict, and conflict can lead to abandonment. She has experienced enough emotional losses to know how painful it is when someone walks away. So instead of addressing issues directly, she chooses silence. She tolerates behaviors that make her uncomfortable because addressing them feels too risky. She believes that if she expresses her concerns, the other person might label her as difficult or demanding. This fear keeps her quiet, even when she knows she should speak up. Women who have been used also tend to take responsibility for problems that are not theirs. They blame themselves for the behavior of others. If someone is distant, she thinks she did something wrong. If someone lies, she wonders if she pushed them away. If someone disrespects her, she questions whether she overreacted. This self-blame creates a cycle where she invalidates her own discomfort and accepts mistreatment as something she unintentionally caused. Red flags become harder to acknowledge when she constantly doubts her own judgment. Another psychological factor is her emotional investment. Once she cares about someone, she has a hard time pulling back, even when everything inside her signals danger. She has a habit of giving too much, so by the time she notices red flags, she is already deeply attached. Detaching feels like losing a part of herself, so she stays, hoping the situation will fix itself. She becomes loyal to someone who hasn't earned that loyalty, and her emotional attachment blinds her from recognizing when her loyalty is being misused. Even when she does recognize a red flag, she tries to handle the situation by overcorrecting. She becomes more understanding, more giving, more patient. If the other person withdraws, she tries harder. If they become inconsistent, she becomes more consistent. She compensates for their shortcomings by increasing her effort, believing her stability can balance their instability. This self-sacrificing behavior creates a dynamic where red flags don't push her away. They push her to try harder even when the relationship is already draining her. Ignoring red flags becomes a survival pattern shaped by fear, emotional conditioning, and a history of being taken advantage of. Low self-worth in a woman who has been used repeatedly doesn't begin with a single incident. It develops gradually, shaped by experiences where her love was not valued, her effort was not appreciated, and her loyalty was taken for granted. Over time, these patterns create a deep internal message. Maybe I'm not enough. She begins to question her worth, not because she lacks value, but because the people she invested in reflected back a distorted image of herself. When someone continuously pours into others and receives little in return, it becomes easy to assume that the issue lies within them rather than in the people they chose. One of the earliest signs of this low self-worth is her tendency to compare herself to others. She begins to believe that other women are more lovable, more desirable, or more worthy of respect. She silently wonders what they have that she doesn't. This comparison doesn't come from jealousy, it comes from insecurity. She thinks that if she were different, more perfect, or less emotional, maybe she would have been treated better. She internalizes mistreatment as a reflection of her inadequacy, not as a reflection of the other person's intentions or emotional limitations. Another aspect of low self-worth is her struggle to set healthy boundaries. She allows people to take more than they should because she fears that saying no will make them leave. She tolerates disrespect or emotional inconsistency because she doesn't feel confident enough to demand better. Deep down, she believes that her needs are too much, her feelings are too heavy, and her expectations are too high. So she minimizes herself to make relationships easier for others, even if it means making them harder for herself. This shrinking behavior reinforces the idea that she must suppress parts of herself to be accepted. She also tends to over-apologize. Even when she hasn't done anything wrong, she apologizes to maintain peace. She apologizes for feeling hurt, for needing reassurance, for asking simple questions, or for expressing discomfort. Each apology reflects a belief that her emotions are burdensome. She tries to make herself as convenient as possible because she fears being seen as difficult. The saddest part is that the more she apologizes, the more people around her begin to expect her compliance, reinforcing the cycle of low self-worth. Low self-worth affects how she interprets love and affection. When someone treats her kindly, she becomes surprised or even suspicious because she's not accustomed to consistent care. She wonders whether she deserves good treatment or if it's temporary. She may even push away genuine affection because she doesn't believe she's worthy of it. Her history has taught her that love often comes with conditions, so unconditional acceptance feels foreign to her. She questions positive experiences more than negative ones because she's been conditioned to associate relationships with pain, not comfort. Another emotional pattern is her difficulty accepting compliments or praise. When someone tells her she is beautiful, hardworking, or deserving, she downplays it. She might dismiss the comment, laugh awkwardly, or redirect the conversation. She struggles to internalize positive feedback because her inner dialogue contradicts it. The voice inside her, shaped by years of being undervalued, whispers that she's not extraordinary. So even when others see her worth clearly, she struggles to see it in herself. She chooses humility not because she is modest, but because she genuinely believes she is ordinary or unremarkable. Low self-worth also manifests in her relationship choices. She tends to settle for people who give her crumbs of affection because she doesn't believe she deserves more. She stays in situations where she is half respected because being partially valued feels better than being alone. When someone shows even minimal interest, she clings to it because she doesn't believe she can find better. Her self-esteem becomes tied to the validation of those who offer the least, creating a cycle where she keeps choosing the same type of emotionally unavailable partners. Internally, she struggles with a deep fear of abandonment. She worries that if she doesn't overextend herself, people will leave. She associates her identity with what she provides, not with who she is. This fear shapes her behavior, making her seek acceptance even from those who don't value her. Low self-worth becomes a quiet force influencing her decisions, emotions, and relationships, built from repeated experiences where she gave everything and received almost nothing in return. Quiet detachment is one of the most defining psychological traits of a woman who has been used repeatedly. It is not loud, dramatic, or confrontational. It is subtle, controlled, and almost invisible until it is complete. This form of detachment develops when a woman reaches a point where her emotional exhaustion outweighs her desire to fix or understand a relationship. After being taken advantage of multiple times, she stops arguing, stops explaining, and stops trying to prove her worth. She doesn't walk away impulsively. She emotionally withdraws long before she physically removes herself. Quiet detachment begins with small changes in how she reacts. She stops investing emotional energy into conversations that used to affect her deeply. Things that once triggered strong feelings now barely move her. She listens without responding, observes without reacting, and distances herself without announcing it. This emotional numbness is not a sign of healing, but a sign of self-protection. Her mind learns that expressing pain does not change anything, so it gradually stops sending emotional signals outward. She becomes present physically, but absent emotionally. One of the earliest signs of quiet detachment is her shift from explaining to observing. In the past, she may have tried to communicate her feelings, express her concerns, or address the imbalance she felt. But after repeated experiences where her words were dismissed or twisted, she stops explaining herself. She no longer feels the need to justify her emotions or make someone understand her perspective. Instead of fighting to be heard, she begins to retreat internally. Her silence becomes her shield, and her lack of reaction becomes her boundary. This kind of detachment also shows up in how she prioritizes her energy. She stops giving attention to things that drain her. She no longer participates in conversations that feel one-sided. She reduces her effort in relationships where she is not valued. The emotional labor she once gave freely now becomes something she protects. When she senses disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional manipulation, she doesn't confront it, she mentally checks out. Her mind shifts from "how can I fix this" to "why am I still here?" This internal shift marks the beginning of her emotional exit. Another aspect of quiet detachment is her change in expectations. She stops expecting consistency, affection, or appreciation from those who have repeatedly failed to provide it. Lowering her expectations is not resignation, it's protection. She no longer waits for someone to change, apologize, or understand her worth. She emotionally accepts the reality of the situation and adjusts her behavior accordingly. When expectations disappear, her attachment loosens naturally. She stops chasing clarity and begins embracing distance. Quiet detachment also affects how she communicates. Her messages become shorter, her tone becomes calmer, and her urgency disappears. She no longer initiates conversations or tries to keep the connection alive. She becomes polite but distant, present but detached. She doesn't argue, blame, or seek closure. She simply withdraws her emotional participation. This withdrawal is often misunderstood by others as indifference, but it is actually the result of deep emotional fatigue and disappointment. Psychologically, this detachment is her nervous system's way of protecting her from further harm. After being used repeatedly, she no longer feels safe opening her heart. Her detachment creates a buffer that prevents her from being hurt again. She becomes less reactive, less expressive, and less emotionally involved. The parts of her that were once open and vulnerable now become guarded and quiet. She chooses peace over emotional chaos, even if that peace comes through distance. Another significant layer of quiet detachment is her ability to walk away without warning. By the time she physically leaves, she has already been gone emotionally for a long time. People around her may feel shocked by her sudden disappearance, but her decision is never sudden. It is the final step of a process she went through silently. She doesn't create drama or seek validation. She leaves quietly, carrying the lessons with her, but leaving behind the emotional weight she no longer wants to carry. Quiet detachment becomes her way of reclaiming control, especially in situations where she was powerless, unheard, or undervalued. It allows her to protect her emotional space without conflict, without explanation, and without seeking permission.